Good morning, everyone. See, this is just morning, just started day. Look at the energy level. What? Good morning. Today's MSME day, right? I know, and thanks everyone that there's a parallel session going on. Our president is addressing, just maybe a few kilometers away, and you guys are here. So we are really privileged, and thank you for, being part of this one. That's great session, great day, and in fact, we all are going to contribute to the valuable conversation today. And I'm looking forward. So welcome, and good morning again. This much better, but still we need energy because we have a half day to move on. So I'll just basically touch base, which I know throughout day we are going to discuss a lot, but I'm just going to start about what we feel from economics, from economist approach. And you can see, right, there's an eco within the economics. And so everything basically starts from the sustainability, everything starts from the planet, everything starts from what we basically talk about, the future goal, not just about the current. And so let's start with that, and with something, maybe some viewpoint, what we call, right? We all are in this room, outside the room, in India, globally. We are basically in a race. We are running. We are running towards the top. We are running towards the productivity. We are running towards the profitability. We are running towards the efficiency. And that has benefited a lot, in fact. That has benefited a lot. And in fact, if I have to look at the average human is basically more prosperous, at least by 12 times, what they used to be pre-industrialization era. So we got benefited, right? 12 times more prosperous. Here I'm not talking about the per capita income things. I'm saying the prosperity. Prosperity is a very broader concept. So 12 times we are prosperous. And if just imagine there was no industrial revolution, nothing would have happened, then the quality of life what we have seen would have been equal to 500 years ago. So which means we got the benefit. But the problem that what we call the race towards the top actually is not towards the top, is race towards the bottom. And I'll tell you why I'm talking about. Let's look at our history of the planet. If you look at the history of the planet, our Earth is around 4.5 billion old. Maybe that was the time when Earth formed. And the average human life was basically started, maybe around the complex life. It was the plant, animal started 550 million ago. That's basically scientific calculation, what basically we can talk about. But just to make it very simple, very easy, let's combine the 4.5 years in just 1 year time. Just one, rescale into just 1 year. Just imagine that 4.5 billion is just part of 1 year, which means the average human life, age of average human lifespan is just 1 second and quarter second. That's it. The Industrial Revolution started last second of that year. And by then, Arctic ice cover lost 2/3 of its thickness. That's the stuff. That's the change. The speed at which this planet is basically creating or accumulating those resources, we are basically very fast depleting. It took centuries, it took many, the millions of years, but it took just centuries to deplete. That's what basically is happening. That's the way we are consuming. The rate at which production, consumption, and demand goes up, the fossil fuel is going to exhaust or maybe run over in just next 2 decades. That's the speed at which means all of us, we have to move towards the cleaner energy. That's not the need. That's not because it will exhaust your resources, but it got a profound impact on your environmental. That's basically we need. And that's why we are asking that there's a strong need for all of us to move towards the clean energy. Otherwise, look at the speed at which we are consuming our resources. possibly will not be available for our, coming generation. Why I'm saying, I look at some basic statistics, death and the cost of the disaster. Out of 100 people died in last 125 year, 62 of them because of the disaster related challenges, disaster related what we call calamities or death. And the cost of that, close to 77% of total 100 rupees what we lost during those what we call the climate disaster related impact, 77 was because of climate related. So that's the impact of your climate. Could be anything. Almost everything basically we are losing because of the climate stuff. Now, when we move, let's look at some of the broader concept, right? And one thing talks about it's very important to track the emission. And what we do, it's very important to track where the emissions are produced, but more critical and important that where emissions are consumed. If I look at entire journey of the product, right from the extraction to production to consumption, that clear picture will emerge. And from what you call, let's look at the production-led approach towards the consumption-led approach, and we'll figure it out that how this emission production being moved away from one country to different countries. And I looked at the data that if you look at the green side, there are top 10 exporter of emission in the world. Generally, they belongs to the emerging market, developing market. There are a few countries, resource rich, they are also exporting. But if you look at the right-hand side of that left chart, that's a red bar, the top 10 what you call importer of emission, they belongs to the developed countries. If you go and see here, there is a basically structural outsourcing of environmental degradation happening for many years, where developed countries are enjoying their clean energy growth, they are having their clean domestic industry at the cost of developing countries. Developing countries are basically producing emission and they're damaging their own industry. But look at the mix. The emission production has not stopped. Someone is consuming, but someone is producing. The developed countries basically started producing, but developed countries started consuming, but developing countries are producing. That's the things happening. That's very clear if you look at the right-hand side chart, the China. That's mirror, the emission export mirror their what you call export intensity. The rise and fall of export, exactly the same line. So they started what we call, they become hub of the global manufacturing, in fact, hub of what we call emission production. And rest of the world, with especially the developed market, they are consumer of this piece. So that's the problem. That's the things. Now, when we look at simple stuff, right, the way we are consuming our resources, that's far more than the capacity of the planet, capacity of the biodiversity can produce. That's the stuff. And if you look at the green sea dot, if everyone have to live the life of what we call socially developed countries or high developed countries where everything is basically great, and everyone, all the 6-7 billion people are trying to live that life of sky green dot, which means we need a 4 Earth to support that, which is not true, which is not going to be basically going forward. What's happening that in the country, they're basically moving the journey. Once they peak, when they become a developed country, they stop producing emission. They outsource to someone else. Someone else is basically producing. And when they go to the bottom, when basically they stop producing the traditional emission, that's how then start producing the e-waste. That's what's happening. Developed countries basically produce the e-waste. They're not producing the traditional emission, but they are producing the e-waste. But somehow, somewhere, some people, some companies, some section are basically produce certain things which degradation, which is basically degrading your earth and your resources. That's what's happening. Now moving on, what we basically call a donut compass to figure out for a life. So the bottom light green, if you can talk about, that is the ecological ceiling, what we call. There's a social foundation for all of us. That's a minimum social requirement for all of us to have a decent quality of life. That's a minimum boundary. The outside boundary, if you call, that we call it ecological ceiling. That's beyond that, your planet degradation will start, which means we cannot go beyond that. We are overshooting, and bottom is basically what we call the shortfall. The light green patch is what where all of ideally should be staying, what we call safe and just space for humanity. In fact, that's a target. That should be the target of the 21st century. And if you talk about what we call Industry Revolution 5, which is started, I'm sure that many people might have been shocked that we are still part of Industry 4, but the Industry Revolution 5 started, and that should be the target of that. That's complementing Industry Revolution 4 by putting research and innovation at the service of transitioning from the older system to socially, socialistic value, human-centric, and sustainable society. Which means Industry 5 revolution can support Industry 4 to be part of that green zone. Beyond that, we'll have a trouble. Less than that, possibly we'll not feel that our quality of life is great. More than that, we are damaging the planet. That's the piece we need here. Now moving on, I think there's a shift from what 21st century economists are thinking, what as against the 20th century economists used to think. The classical economists, all we have learned, right? When we want to grow, then your what you call the inequality is inevitable, which means when you're growing, your things got to get worse before it improves, and improvement will take you to other side. In fact, Industry Revolution 5, that this concept does not fit into this one. Industry Revolution 5 basically trying to say that how we have a equitable growth, where we basically share the value created to the stakeholder who helped to create those values. And that's possible. That's happening. Thanks to all the technological development we have, the network technology what we have today, that will help to create and distribute equally to the people who are creating that values. Look at our financial technology. That's basically got democratization of credit. That basically the cost of acquiring new customer is significantly so down that things will be very easy to distribute your wealth equally amongst everyone. That's basically we need. What we need to create economies which is distributed by design, not towards one side of the society. Everyone should have those equal benefit, equal stake or share of the created values. Now, how we do that, right? And the leaders, all of you are basically leaders in your own field, should be given a good flexibility, responsibility, and should not be basically what we call the guiding principle. Because what has been discussed in the board meeting is certainly the short-term nature. Thus, we need much beyond that. We need a sustainable society. Our planning and our discussion, our vision has to basically revolve around how long-term sustainability is going to play a role, not the short-term boardroom meeting conversation. In fact, when I look at some of the data point, I basically looked at the two set of company who are basically issuing the guiding for their what you call valuation guides for that. Those companies unfortunately produced 8% of basically total share, value of the market value, just 8% growth. Whereas the company who does not issue any guide for their, future valuation, they are basically producing 20%. Look at the jump. The company focusing purely from the sustainability perspective, not just the boardroom meeting. They are basically growing much faster and creating more value than the company otherwise. So, in a nutshell, now into conclude, if I talk about, I think there are few things we have to do to ensure that we are not damaging our planet. We are thinking about the long-term sustainability practices, long-term sustainable growth for everybody, planet, people, our processes, and of course for the company itself. Three things. First, operate for the long-term benefit of business and society, not just for yourself. And the second, drive shareholder value as a result, not a goal. And the third thing is very simple, create positive returns for all stakeholders. If you talk about one, it's difficult to implement. If you talk about two, slightly more difficult. If you talk about three, someone feel the impossible, but actually it's not. All three of them reinforce each other, and that create a more benefit to the companies than what we basically think about it. If you take some example, actually what we have to think in terms of our principle, our moral values, what basically we are contributing, what we are doing, how the way we are driving our business. If I go and talk about one book, I'm sure that some of you might have read, Net Benefit, Net Positive. 2017, Heinz basically offer to buy Unilever at very premium rate. But that time, Unilever declined that offer, that very lucrative offer, very great offer. They declined because they didn't match their principle, the values, common goal was not same. Today, if you go, just one part, Hindustan Unilever market cap is much bigger than the Heinz put together. That's the thing basically. You need to trust your goal, you need to trust your shared values, you need to trust your principle. Otherwise, short-term profit is just going to be a negative for the overall society. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward for really insightful conversation today. Thank you.